I have been an astrology fan for the past 5 years and wanted to dive a bit deeper into how our birth charts can help us understand our personality traits and life experiences. Courtney Miller has been an astrologer for the past 6 years and personally has read my chart and also the How We Get Thru chart, because yes, businesses can also have birth charts. And she really helped me understand my past, my present, and my future. Listen in as we talk about how astrology can be used as a tool for understanding our personal struggles, how we can embrace both the dark and the light parts, and of course, how transits can impact our mental health. If you are new here, you are listening to the How We Get Thru podcast, a place for you to feel connected through deep and meaningful conversations with healers from all over the world. I'm your host, Jen, a licensed therapist and founder and CEO of the How We Get Thru app. And my mission is to bring you affordable and diverse therapy resources to help you get through the hard stuff, all in one place and at your own pace. Welcome to the How We Get Thru community. Hello, and welcome back to the How We Get Thru podcast. We have another magical episode. We have Courtney Miller, who's an astrologer, and a new name change. We have Cosmic Clarity Astrology, formerly known as Willow Bloom, right? Bloom.
Willow's Bloom.
Willow's Bloom. Yes. Courtney, welcome to the show. We're so excited to have you.
Thank you so much for having me on. I'm excited too.
Yeah. So Courtney and I met maybe like 2 years ago, 3, I don't know. It feels like yesterday.
Yeah, it actually does. I remember our reading too.
You do?
Yeah.
That's very kind of you.
It was interesting to me.
Yeah. Oh, in what way?
I like what you're doing. So I was really excited about your business and everything that you're launching. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah. Courtney did a business reading for me. So she takes your birth chart and then your business birth chart and then kind of like compares and overlaps them. And it was really helpful for me in a lot of ways of like direction and marketing and purpose. So thank you for that. And that's why I wanted to have you on the show, because I really value your work and I appreciate just how much you've helped me. So thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. So we usually start the show off with like a mental health myth, and I'm sure there are a ton even like pertaining to astrology, but we would love to know what's yours.
Yeah, I think that the biggest one is that people don't really understand how complex we are as humans. So they will kind of just take on their sun sign or even just like their rising sign or even their top 3, and they'll feel like maybe that doesn't fully kind of map onto the complexity of their personality. And that's because there's so much more going on in the chart. There's a lot of layers that I think people don't always know just going into it.
Yeah, which I think is important. So can you kind of maybe, we're going to get deeper into the chart, but can you maybe just talk about rising sign, sun sign, moon sign, and like what they represent?
Yeah, for sure. So they really have a lot of overlap, but the sun sign has a lot to deal with our outer personality as well as the rising sign. These are kind of the most forefront when we meet somebody. The sun in particular are traits that we really naturally embody, things that we're really skilled at, things that we're interested in. It kind of determines how we make decisions, how we move through life. It is like literally the light of our life and the direction and purpose of our life, amongst other things, because it's a little bit more complex than that. But the sun is a big piece in our career and our purpose. It's also related typically to the father. So you can see if there's something weird going on with the sun, there might be some weird things going on in your relationship with your dad.
Yeah.
And yeah, so it describes a lot about that kind of forefront personality. The rising sign does too, because it's how people perceive us. And oftentimes I feel like the rising is a little bit of an enigma, because I've heard astrologers describe it in many different ways. My personal belief, and from my experience, is that the rising sign is something that we both embody but are growing into as a person. So it's not really something that, like the sun, where I feel like we are fully embodied in it, fully established. We've mastered it. We understand it. We're living and breathing it. It's so subjective. We can't get away from it. The rising sign is something that I feel like we kind of have a foot in and a foot out, where we have, again, some of this energy, but we're still learning lessons on how to actually embody the healthiest version of that. And so usually we encounter, in my opinion, some struggles related to that sign or some themes related to that sign. The rising sign always starts off the first house. So if you look at an astrology wheel, there's these 12 pieces of pie. It's basically a circle divided into 12. And the very first piece of pie is the first house, which represents the body, which is, of course, our aesthetics. So the rising sign is one of the strongest parts of the chart when it comes to how we are physically perceived, as well as our physical health. And there's also a really important planet in charge of that sign. So each planet, it like kind of rules over a specific sign in the zodiac. And so whatever planet rules over that sign will also really describe your personality and physical appearance and any health conditions as well. So it's really interesting to kind of take a look at that for a greater understanding of yourself.
Yeah. Wait, I have a question for that.
Yeah.
It's the planet that rules that sign or the planet that's in your pie chart in the first house?
So the planet that rules that sign will determine your health, but also planets in the first house can equally affect your health.
Okay.
But it won't be... It's more just like the planet ruling that sign is more descriptive of your overall constitution and kind of what organs or body parts are affected or more pronounced.
Wow. Mm-hmm.
So let's say, for example, I'm a Virgo rising and Mercury always rules Virgo and Gemini. So when I look at my chart, I see, okay, my Mercury is in Cancer, which is why I have a very round face. And there is that very kind of soft Cancer feminine energy that comes with Mercury in that sign. So normally Virgo risings tend to be like thinner, like smaller bones kind of thing. But then the Cancer adds more of that softness, roundness. So you can see how these things kind of get pieced together and why there's so many layers of complexity.
Yeah.
The moon also describes health as well. And for everybody's chart is one of the important planets for our overall well-being. Emotionally, physically, it describes our mother. It describes our childhood. It describes our kind of subjective lens through which we view everything and emotionally react to things. And I personally believe the moon is the most important planet in our birth chart because it shows like how we were formed, how our development was, and did it go well? Were we really seen emotionally? Were we, were our parents present with us? Were we physically taken care of? And if there's something going on with the moon, usually that can kind of reverberate out into your life, into your relationships, through the more subconscious elements of our life and affect everything. So it's really the who we are behind closed doors type of energy.
Yeah.
So when you really get into relationship with somebody, the moon comes out.
Ah, okay. So it's better to look at the moon, someone's moon sign, if you're in relationship with them.
Yeah, I think, the sun sign and the rising are still there and they're still relevant, but that's really what you're going to see first when you meet somebody anyway. So if you really want to know if you're compatible, you will need to see the moon because that's what's going to come out over time when they feel safe, when they feel vulnerable, and you'll start to get to see the more holistic, version of them.
Oh, I love that. It almost sounds like moon is past, sun is present, and rising is future in some ways.
I love that. I never thought about it like that, but I'm sure that there's something there.
Yeah. Like, again, I don't think anything should be like solid or black and white, but it's almost like this framework that you can kind of view it in.
I love that. Yes.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Use that. Tweet that.
Okay, I will.
Yeah. Like it's yours. I love that because almost sometimes I'm like with my moon, I'm like, ugh, it's unimportant, or like I get focused on one. I'm like, oh, my rising. But I do have a question about like the elements around things because I am all fire. I am triple fire. And to me, when I learned that, it was actually really healing for me because I'm very passionate. I am quick to anger. I'm a little bit of go, go, go. It really helped me understand my anger, I think, a little bit. Like, no wonder I'm like all the time, especially in parenting, where it was just so shaming for me in a lot of ways. So it gave me, and that's the way I perceive it anyway, part of it. It just gave me a little bit of more understanding that it's like innately in me. So how do I work with that instead of like trying to like be shameful about it, and how do I accept these parts? But yeah, but that also sounds really unbalanced to be all fire. So is there a like perfect combination, or how do the elements kind of play into this? I mean, we're all unique, they're all great, whatever, but like I feel, is that a lot?
Yeah. So I'm glad that you brought this up because I actually think that this is a really important topic. And this is actually one of my first astrology videos I made, was talking about finding out your missing element, if you have one, basically seeing if you have any elemental imbalance and what you can do activity or even diet-wise to help kind of rebalance your elements. So I'm also going to have so that was more psychological, and I'll have a new podcast coming out that's more about the physical. But definitely you're right. When we have a lot of one element, we tend to skew towards a specific behavior type, a specific even like bodily functions. And so we need to balance it out with preferably the opposite element. So,
which is water?
In this case would be water.
Water?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I like what you're doing as a profession because it's really watery. And
emotional.
It might be exactly. So it might be a good way for you to channel some of your fire energy into something more soft, soothing, gentle, that type of thing. And I think also recognizing where the superpower is and leaning into that, but knowing when it's going into overdrive and like burning you, because too much fire will burn you, too much earth will sedate you. So it's like we want to find the things that can soothe that burn. So this could be like even cooling foods or exercises that help you come more into your emotional body, your intuition, your sensitivity, especially because I think fire, like it's important to almost look at the negative traits to see when that's happening.
Yeah.
So the impulsivity, also taking things personally. This is super fire.
Oh, yeah.
Like, the ego is quite strong with the fire. And so recognizing in relationships when that starts to create friction, because fire is very passionate. But again, when it gets too hot, it can create conflict and burn you or the other person. And like you mentioned, our relationship with anger. And I think the biggest one is like pace, because we can actually, fire has the strongest vital force. So you can go more than other people can go, typically. But often fire doesn't always recognize its own limits, and it can overheat and overdo and overwork. And so it's really important to recognize I have strong vitality. This is an asset, but I also need to be very self-aware around when I may be pushing past that point and going into burnout.
I love that. I mean, I think that we talked a little bit before we started, but that was all last year for me, of just pushing the app and like creating all of this content and all these courses. And I think, I was working with amazing therapists, and they're feeding the ego of that also, like, this is a great idea, I want to be a part of that. And so I think that like kind of blinded me a lot of my burnout of like, well, this is great, it's happening, like this, people want this, like it's great.
Yeah.
And then it came to a point where I was like, oh my gosh, I'm so exhausted in my life, and what am I doing? And it's funny, even as in movement, I like do not want to do a fucking HIIT workout. Like I don't want to run. I just want such slow movement. And it could be like hibernation too right now, but I'm just like, I want such slowness and stillness in my life.
Yeah.
And really trying to embrace that of like, I don't need to be overworking 24/7 to feel accomplished in things. And so it really taught me a lot, which is really beautiful. But I love that concept, that visual of like taking the one opposite and kind of focusing on that or trying to balance that out instead of trying to take all of them, right?
Yeah. Yeah, unless you have one that is missing. So let's say you have lots of fire and lots of water, but you're missing earth. So, or air. Like if you're missing
air.
one, then focus on building up that element as well. And I do, you can check out my YouTube channel if you're like, what are these elements? How do I balance them? I have all that on there.
It's so good.
It's literally called Finding Your Missing Element, Cosmic Clary Astrology on YouTube.
Yes. Okay, tell us again, what can the chart really tell us? Like, so everything. I know.
Well, maybe it's better to say what it can't tell us. I'll give you a mixture of both. So I feel like sometimes people come into an astrology reading and they want really specific stuff. Like, what's the exact career I should be doing? Which, first of all, it's a little bit of a disservice to look to somebody else to find your career type when there are millions of careers out there. And like, I don't even know what all of them are in existence. There are so many very specific things that exist that I'm not aware of. So when it comes to like very specific information about how something is going to manifest, I think that that's a lot up to the interpretation of the astrologer. So just keep that in mind when you're going into a reading. However, astrology does get pretty specific. What it's doing is it's speaking through archetypes. So I'm looking at the energy of something and I'm pulling many archetypes and seeing if the energy is compatible or not compatible. And you can create stories of the energy around this. So for example, I can see what somebody's childhood was like. Were they neglected? Did they have a father that was an alcoholic? Did they move around a lot? I can see the energy of addiction or instability, and I can piece together storylines. I can then see how that reverberates into their current reality, how they might have issues with an autoimmune condition because that same part of the chart that rules over their father's addiction also implies a physical porousness within them that makes them more sensitive.
Wow.
And they're more likely to develop autoimmune conditions. I can see like what kind of needs they have in terms of their career. So I can see what would be best for them in terms of what they're really good at, what they're attracted to, what they need to have in this lifetime as a soul, what they need to experience. And so I can see like larger brushstrokes rather than a very specific type of career, though sometimes specific information will come to me more as like a download. And I'm like, I can see you writing a children's book. That's really specific. But other times I'm just like, you need this, this, and this to be happy in your career life. It can tell you a lot about what kind of relationships you're going to have. Like I've seen in people's charts, when they're going to have some issues come up. And this is a little bit hard because I don't really always want to say like, because things can manifest in many different ways. I hate to like point out really negative things, but I also don't want to not point things out. So for example, I've had a client who I can see in her chart would have, or she had an abusive partner. And then there was like a contentious fight over their children. And I can see how the children were a part of this story and push and pull. And so, I found her in the middle of this journey. But if this were happening 30 years ago or 20 years ago, it would be then hard to like decide, do I tell her not to have kids because she looks like she should have kids, but it's also going to be a source of great pain in this dynamic with her partner. And so it gets a little bit complicated. But yeah, you can see a lot in the chart. And also, of course, you can see what's coming up. So that's more what we call transits. And that's basically when planets start to interact with where the planets were when you were born. And they make all these angles and all these things can start to happen. So you can see, like, for example, I had a client who I was like, is your mom ill or anything? Like, is there anything going on there? And she's like, no, but my sister is. I was like, okay, well, this date doesn't look so good. And on that date, she found out that her sister was terminal with her cancer.
Wow.
So you can really see, like, I couldn't know, oh, it's definitely your mom or versus your sister, but I could see a woman in her family.
Wow.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So yeah, you can get pretty specific about things, especially once you start to get the context that other people give you. You can help narrow down the interpretation of what's coming up and the archetypes of what that could represent for them. So it's not that astrologers aren't legit when you give them information. It just helps them like create a smaller scope of how to interpret something.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And what is that like for you? Are you going crazy over your chart? Like, okay, what's going to happen on this date? Or like, or this is where my career is, like, or do you get read? Like, how do you live your life with all that info?
No one's ever asked me this. I've thought a lot about making a video on this because of how my journey has evolved with astrology over the years and how initially it was detrimental to my mental health, actually, because sometimes having great awareness over things in the future that could go wrong can lead to anxiety, can lead to worry, anticipation. And that's actually something I experienced when I was looking ahead at the Pluto and Saturn conjunction, which was the start of COVID.
Wow.
I saw that it was coming up. I knew that it was going to be a really life-changing thing for the world. And I was really scared. And I thought about it for months. And I was like, what is this going to be? I'm so nervous. Like, how is this going to impact me? How's it going to impact my loved ones? And everyone. And, we got to it and I got through COVID and I realized, like, retrospectively, it was obviously very traumatic for people. From my personal life, it wasn't a traumatic experience. And so it really put things into perspective, how it's so unhealthy to look really far ahead and worry about things. But also astrology is such a gift to understand why things aren't going the way that you want them to go in a specific moment. And it gives you a lot of context and perspective that is extremely healing. So on one hand, it can be both the wounding and the healing that's happening from the same tool. So personally, how I use it is I have, first of all, become much more detached emotionally from my transits coming up because I've seen my own resiliency and I've also seen things manifest less negatively than they could have been.
Right.
Or they were negative, but because of where I was at, that's something that I needed and it wasn't something that I couldn't handle. And I think, so I look at big transits throughout the year and I like to plan out my business with that. So like this year, I have a really positive transit for career. So I plan on using that for launches.
Cool.
I also have some transits often related to either hard work or to failure. So I'm really taking this with a grain of salt that maybe I will launch something and I'll ride this positive wave and then maybe something will happen, and making peace with, I think, the surrender to the unknown has been really important. Mostly on a day-to-day basis, I will look at those big transits through the year and kind of have a rough idea, and then I will let them go mentally, energetically. I make peace with them. This has been a process.
Yeah.
So it doesn't happen overnight. And when it comes to like day-to-day life, I really don't like to look at my transits until I'm in some situation, until I feel some type of way.
Got it.
Then I look at my chart when I'm present with the energy, and I give myself the perspective of what this means and why this is happening and what I need to do. So it's like I kind of take life in smaller chunks, like 1 or 2 weeks at a time. And this really helps my mental health, because I think astrology, again, is such a powerful tool to understand, oh, I am failing right now at this thing, or I am struggling emotionally, or I'm having this health issue because of this. And this is what I can do. And this is when it's going to end. And like, it's been such a lifesaver. But again, I think if you try to reach too far and think about too much about the future, it can be detrimental. So I like to give readings about transits in the future to give people some context, but my preference would be for them to, have the water hose, where I'm just like telling them a bunch of information, or the fire hose, and then actually come back that month and look, what's happening this month? What do I need to prepare for?
Yeah.
That
makes a lot of sense. I'm also wondering, like, your experience of that, like, detriment to your mental health is also that, like, learning curve of, if I'm going to be teaching other people this, like, this is something that can happen, and to have that empathy and that awareness. I mean, I think about that as a therapist too, right? Like, we're not here to re-traumatize people, but if we're like, give them everything, is that helpful for them, right? It's like that discernment again of like, do I say this now or do I not? Like, and we're all human, and, we'll make a choice and whatever, but I just think there's a lot of power in your experience, and I see that in me, like, in my experience, and then I can deliver this message or not. With that love and empathy, because you've been there.
Yeah. That's really interesting how it ties back also into like difficult transits coming up, or something difficult in somebody's chart. Like, how much do I say? How much emphasis do I put on this? So I typically will go and I will kind of come with more of curiosity. Let me ask questions, and then state the possibilities that can happen with something like this, or how this might affect somebody. But I try to really feel out where somebody is and what they're receptive to in that moment. And this is one of the reasons why I don't like to do synastry readings, so relationship readings, for couples that have been together for less than 6 months, preferably a year, because they always come to me with these like big doe eyes and this beautiful, like, everything is perfect. And I'm like, I can see the flaws already. And I don't feel like they're not receptive to hearing about relationship. They don't want to hear about what's wrong with their relationship or what could go wrong. And not that I only focus on that, but I think it's important, if you want a real reading, to get the good and the bad, so you understand how to work with each other and what that person really needs from you. And these beautiful kind of rose-colored glasses are not compatible with my preferred reading style.
Right. They see what they want to see at that point.
And I feel like I'm not here to rain on their parade. They're going to discover this at some point, and I don't need to like ruin the honeymoon phase with my downer,
Oh my gosh, that's so true. I feel like, does it feel like love and career are the main things that people want a reading for in their chart?
I mean, there's so many things that people come to readings for, but I would say,
or healing,
large subjects that, a lot of people come for healing, or they are going through something that they want to understand. So, I have just all different kinds of people who have a strain on their relationship, people who are, wanting to win some kind of legal battle, or they just got diagnosed with cancer, they just had surgery. So it's like all kinds of things that when people are feeling maybe a little bit lost, or they want more connection with themselves, or get to know themselves better, connection to source, I think that it's a tool for that.
Got it. Like, does the universe have my back or not?
Or making sense out of really confusing long periods of suffering, especially. And that's like my favorite, is to be able to help people understand like what this all serves on a soul purpose for them, And that's when I think the nodes and past lives and things kind of come into play.
Yeah. Which past lives, I don't know if I ever told you this, but in my mind I was supposed to email you about it and tell you. But I think in my chart you said that I could have been murdered in a past life. Like that was a big possibility. And I did a regression and I for sure was murdered.
Really?
I was this elder man and I was like really big in the community. And I mean, just go with me here, guys. And I was like almost like building an uprising in some way, but I was like building people up and like the king or whatever didn't like it and I got like beheaded, which is crazy. And there's sometimes like when my kids like put their hands like over like my son especially, it's happened like at least 5 times. It's like this visceral reaction. I'm like crying and I'm like, get off of me so quickly. It's just so weird. But I wanted to tell you that because it was, when you do a reading, it's like so much information. And then even the past life regression, right? And so it's the integration process where they come back, like these downloads or whatever you want to call them. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this makes sense because this happened in here and this one happened here. Because the regression for me is almost like, is this any of this real? Did I just make all this up,
Yeah.
But I wanted to verify that with you, that actually happened.
That's so cool. Yeah, I've heard this like a few times from people where I'll tell them like, I kind of see this in a past life, and they'll be like, I had someone like a medicine journey experience and that came to me, or a past life regression. And so these things, they don't have to be the exact scenario, but the energy is definitely carrying over. And I think it's really potent, and it's one of the things that fascinates me the most because we come into this life with baggage, in my opinion, and it's from those past lives. And sometimes we can't make sense of the baggage. Oftentimes we can see, okay, I'm afraid of this because of this in my childhood, but there's sometimes like a deep fear of being touched on your neck, or of fire, or of water, or of heights. Like these things can very much be linked with past life experiences. And if you guys listening to this podcast haven't read Brian Weiss's books,
is that Many Lives, Many Masters?
Yeah, Many Lives, Many Masters. I think Many Souls, Many Bodies, or something like that. I think there's more than one, but they're just fascinating stories for how those links are still there.
Yeah. And so what is, like, when you see a past life, like, what is, like, can you see multiple? I mean, I guess it depends on a chart. Like, what is the degree angle?
I can't see multiple. So these are all, how do I explain this? So it's kind of like when you're looking at a painting and you're trying to interpret, if it's abstract, like what this symbol or what this shape might mean for them. So it doesn't point to a specific period of time. It's more of this like abstract concept that you can start to draw together. Again, the story, when you have multiple of them and you see how they're linked. It's more data oriented than that, but there's definitely some art to it. I would say art of interpretation. But generally you want to look at the South Node for who you were in a past life, and any planets next to that South Node will describe you and your personality and like major life experiences.
In the past.
Okay.
Wow.
And whatever planet rules the sign that the South Node is in also will describe who you were, that theme in your past life story. So like, for example, if you have your South Node in Leo, the sun is a ruler of that, and you would look at the sun to describe some of your experiences in that past life, and they would vary. I see them as like rippling out into this lifetime as well. So usually there will be like a modern day form of that past life energy in our first 30 years of life. This is my theory, especially in our childhood. Yeah. But I would really say the first 30 years, because that's before we have our Saturn return. This is before we like
40, right? When
30
you're 40 years. Oh, 30 is your 30. Saturn return. Do you have more than one Saturn return?
You do. Yeah. So you
Okay.
have one every like 29 and a half years. So
Okay.
you'll have one later in life as well.
Okay.
And good question. And yeah, so I typically see like these things reverberate out into this current life, again, in a modern day form. So that would be really curious and to explore the themes that you went through in that past life of maybe I was starting an insurrection, I was loud, I was getting people passionate about something, fired up about something, and then I was punished for it. Are there themes like that that occurred in your childhood or that occurred in your early adult life?
Wow.
And what that might mean for you as a soul. And then I see that as like, once that completes itself, there's like a tape that reruns in some way. And then after our Saturn return, I see that's when we get to start to choose differently for how we want to react to things, how we want to make a different story after those experiences. And this is important because the nodes, which are always opposite each other, the North Node is our destiny of our future, how we're meant to move forward into something. The South Node is our past. And we don't want to abandon our past. Some people are like, only the North Node. No, we want to balance these, but we're so heavy in our South Node, our past, that we have to lean really far forward into the North Node. And when we have a planet that makes a square, so a 90-degree angle to these nodes, this represents a past life where we didn't get to fully actualize or experience something, otherwise known as a skip step.
Wow.
Not everybody has that.
Yeah.
But if you do have that, then
You were murdered in a past life.
That honestly does happen. It's like they're literally killed, so they never got to go through some of the thing that they were supposed to experience. So very possible. And so when you see that, it's like, do I want to make different choices in this lifetime after my Saturn return to make sure that I do get to live out this skip step and I do get to move forward as a soul? And to me, that's like the most important part of my astrology readings, if I see that in somebody's chart, because I don't want them to have to come back and do this all over again. I want them to see you didn't make the choice to have a career because you had a family and you were indebted to that and you had to stay home. And now in this lifetime, you're supposed to have that career. So what choice can you make? You already have a family. What choice can you make to still do the career? So that's like a really simple example, but those are the things that I look for.
Do you, like, in your belief, is it like what this soul's purpose for this lifetime is supposed to play out, or a part of it, or all of it? How would you?
Yeah. I think definitely is like this. If we're doing large brushstrokes of these lifetimes, that is definitely like the biggest like symbol or the biggest brushstroke for this lifetime of like, this is what you really energetically are supposed to move into. So let's say you had South Node Libra, which is all about relationships, North Node Aries. Actually, yes, we are in that now. So if you have a kid that's born this year, they're going to have that. Then there's something about this lifetime where, in a simplified sense, you're supposed to move towards more selfishness and more independence, more embodiment of your no and your anger and your boundaries, separation from others when you need to, doing things on your own because you want to do them, following your heart and your instincts, not doubting yourself. So that's this year. That's a big part of what this year is. And when we become, if we get stuck in a codependent relationship, or we're doubting ourselves, or we, look to everybody else for answers, like that's when you would know I'm living in my South Node versus my North Node. And checking in with this is really beautiful because it helps us make sure that we're keeping our like lifetime balanced. Like each lifetime we're moving into different archetypes, and if we only sit in one archetype, we're going to create a lot of imbalance. Like you have lots of fire, so just like that, you would want to create balance with the water. So it's all about that, and it's thinking about this in terms of like a big perspective of many lives.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yes. I love that. I was just thinking of, because we're in the North Node Aries, South Libra.
Yeah.
And that I'm feeling that like individualization in a lot of ways, and that like moving away from codependency, and like grounding in my own, like what am I standing for? Who am I? Like all of these questions. And we're also in the age of Aquarius, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's, I think, something that's like, that's not precise. That's like a little bit debatable. We could have already been in the age of Aquarius. These are like large societal chapters. Pluto moved into Aquarius. So if you're looking at it from that angle,
okay,
I would say that we are in the age of Aquarius, especially now that Pluto's moved into the sign.
And that means what exactly?
And so, so if you think about Aquarius, like you can start to see this, like the development of progressive ideals and technology and quick advancements in air sign. And it's also fixed. So there's something about this that is, it's like moving really quickly, but there's like a stubbornness to it as well, especially in terms of like beliefs. So I'm really interested to see like what comes out with Pluto and Aquarius this next 20 years. But basically we're entering this new chapter where the things that we're creating and moving forward with, we're not going to be able to come back from. Like society is going to have to be reimagined. Wow. And I think that's why the Pluto-Saturn conjunction happened in the previous sign in Capricorn. Setting up COVID, it kind of had to like demolish these planets are about ending. So they had to demolish what was there in our traditional society, which is Capricorn, traditional hierarchical government, banking systems, authority figures that we used to really listen to. Then it gets shifted into Aquarius, which is about the people. And it's about everybody's, the hive mind, really everybody's minds working together to revolutionize society, to redo these structures, to further movements, to reimagine what the world could look like. And I think that's definitely something that we can see again with technology specifically, even, human rights, even just like the way that we've completely reconceptualized and normalized the reconceptualization of gender. And that's something that I feel like you can see just so clearly. And I think it's going to go well beyond that into the future.
I just got chills when you said like the hive mind part. Like it's just, you feel it. I feel it, and it's, something again has to be destroyed to be rebuilt. And that's terrifying and exciting at the same time,
Yeah. Then we can create like our own digital currencies and we can have more personal power. We can decide that we don't want to be ruled over in a specific way. We want to have more power. And but there's a lot of beauty in that, and there's also a lot of potential for things to go wrong. So not to be overly negative, but I have a whole video on this with a good friend and astrologer, Taryn, on my channel, Pluto and Aquarius. So I'd recommend checking that out. But I'm sure you can imagine just thinking about what AI is possible in creating. And I think the biggest thing is like we're progressing so fast that like we can't, the traditional structures that do work, that need to be in place, like laws, for example, that protect us, certain laws at least need to be there, those can't keep up. So now we're having issues that are moving faster than our actual government moves, and it's creating more problems. So, that's just kind of the beginning of opening Pandora's box and not being able to shut it again.
Terrifying.
That's great. Not to scare you guys or anything.
I know. I was listening to one podcast about this guy who like basically helped create the AI and I had to shut it off. I'm sure at the end, I'm sure he gave us something to do, but I was like, I cannot keep listening to this.
That gives me a lot of anxiety. I love technology and I'm like fascinated by it, but equally I'm fearful of it. And my birth chart's kind of set up this way to be thinking about stuff like this. And I've been thinking about this for like the last like 10 years. And it's really been very present with me around once we create AI, which can create anything, like everything starts to mass accelerate, because that we don't have to create each advancement. AI creates that advancement, if that makes sense. So
Right.
So it's yeah, I think people underestimate or don't think about how serious this is, and like how life-changing this is, and societally impacting this is. And it's going to completely revolutionize and accelerate our growth and the way our society is structured. And not to like be fearful, because I mean, there's definitely stuff to be fearful, but I think if we're all aware, the people who are in power can actually maybe do things to like have precautions before it gets to be too late.
Yeah. I also think about it from like the humanity perspective, that the more technical we get, the actual need for connection gets higher.
Yes.
And so it becomes really unbalanced quickly, but then the desire gets higher to be in communities, to be with people, to be around people. Like I see it, my practice is all virtual, and I had a coffee with a new person I met. I'm like, oh my God, I need to do this more often. I need to get out of here. Like, so just that need for connection will never go away. And so I always come back to that, like our humanity, our love, our connection, our spirits together can't be destroyed by technology. It can silence it a little bit. It can get us distracted from it. But the need and the craving for it is like so innately in us that we'll find our ways back to each other, is my
I love that
motto.
And I feel like keeping that in mind can have us create the healthy like boundaries and practices and habits that will ensure that we remain connected to our bodies, to our brethren, and you know, not lose sight of what makes us us.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. It's hard work, but it's already starting to happen. I think with parenting and like kids not having social media. My kids are still young yet, but it's starting to like, it always kind of whiplashes back, you know? Like, this really sucked for this generation. Like, let's not do that. But then something else advances and we're like, you know, again, a little too quickly. So like having to kind of repair it often. But I think we're doing a good job of that as best as we can to kind of respond to the devastation that technology has had.
Yeah, it's hard. And this really is like astrology. Like you can have the thing that's in your chart, like the sign, like your sun. What's your sun sign?
Sagittarius.
Okay, so your sun in Sagittarius, like you're going to have that be both your greatest ally and asset and your the downside, like the thing that can also be the slippery slope. And it's like, I see this so much in our own charts and in life. It's like the thing that advances us can also undermine us. And so it's all about that balance, I guess.
Yeah. And I think, you know, when you recognize both, that becomes your power, because your dark is also teaching you your light. I also heard on a podcast the other day, this guy was like, you know, I don't trust anybody that doesn't acknowledge their dark. Like that's where you get the Hitlers, where they believe that they're only good and this is good for everyone. And so, you know, it is, how do you really embrace these parts of yourself, because they balance you and allow you to move forward. But that's also hard. It's a lot of hard work too, like facing that and looking in the mirror. Or your chart.
Or your chart. Yeah. Speaking of that, I really see planets in the 12th house as parts that have been pushed to the side in the subconscious.
Oh.
And so I have this is, I think, my most popular video on YouTube, because it's really extensive and it goes into each planet in the 12th. So, it's called 12th House Planets Repressed You. I would definitely recommend checking that out if you have planets in the 12th. Even if you have a sign there, it's still relevant, because the energy of that sign or that planet growing up was very likely either misrepresented. So it could have been, like, let's say you have Mars in the 12th. Mars is about anger and masculinity and pride and confidence. So maybe like you grew up with a dad who was super angry all the time. And so you disowned your Mars, it's in your 12th house, it's more in your subconscious, and then you have trouble fully making peace with and accessing your anger in a healthy and modulated way. Or what can also happen is that energy was demonized growing up. So every time you expressed your anger, your parents would get mad at you and they would send you to your room or something like that. So planets in the 12th show where you were not accepted for expressing that energy, or where it was so grossly misrepresented that you didn't want that in your life. Ooh. And then it gets subdued to the shadow. And planets in the 12th house, this is the house of undoing, self-undoing. So you see how the shadow can also be the thing, like when we refuse to acknowledge something, it can also be the thing that comes back and influences us subconsciously, has us do things that ultimately either express this energy in unhealthy ways, like maybe an outburst or under the table, or hurting ourselves with that energy. Like if we don't express our anger, maybe we show our anger against ourselves and we hurt ourselves. So you can see how when we don't see our darkness or our shadow, even though it might not even be dark, but it's just something that we've demonized. Repressed. Yeah.
Put in the dark. Yeah.
Put in the dark. Yeah. We start to have that. I mean, it's always in our life still. It's just, it's now outside of our awareness. And that is actually scary.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that can be really healing, integrating all parts of you,
Yeah. Yeah.
But it takes a lot. It takes a lot of balls to look at that. And a lot of wanting, desire into that,
Yeah. And I think it's okay for it to take your whole life and just be like this experiment of taking a little bit out, playing with it, and then like feeling comfortable with that. And then later on, when another transit happens that opens up that planet, you come back and you take a little bit. So I see it as like we compartmentalize things, and I can see based off of our transits what energy or what like part of our own psyche are we working on in a particular moment, what themes are we dealing with in a particular moment based off of that transit, and then maybe it goes to rest and then we focus on another area of our life or our personality. And so it's like it doesn't have to be this overwhelming thing that we do all at once.
I love that. I just love how therapeutic it is. Like it's so tied to like the essence of your soul and family and past and relationships. Like it's not just like a zodiac, like it was, in the newspaper. Do you guys remember the newspaper magazine,
Right.
of your horoscope? Like it just, pop culture, I think, took that to an extreme. And I think astrology is coming back. I mean, even just the rising sign, I'm like, oh my gosh. And knowing this, like, what's your rising sign, And then, but then not getting fixated again on things, which I think we tend to do. I have one question. What if you don't have any planets in certain parts of your chart? Like you just don't look at those? Do they matter?
Yeah, great question. So this is a really common question. There are books, like I think this is in the very first astrology book that I ever read, if I'm not mistaken. It's called The Only Astrology Book You'll Ever Need, which is a lie, but it's still a helpful book.
Great marketing though.
Yeah, it's all in the title.
Yeah.
But there's a few ways I want to talk about this. First of all, there's ways in which our chart can be organized. So like if you have this circle and it's divided into 12 pieces of pie, 6 are below the horizon and they're more personal. So the bottom 6 slices are about your personal life, your life growing up, really like behind the scenes type of energy. The top of the chart is above the horizon. So like where obviously the sun is, that's visible. It's about our career, our friendships, our life out in the world. So you can also divide the chart into half. So there's like the left side and then the right side. So the right side has a little bit more to do with our kind of relational aspects. And then the left side's a little bit more about ourselves. It's not quite like that. And then we have like the first 3 houses are divided into a quadrant. So it's like there's ways that you can divide the chart. So having like, for example, one quadrant or one half, like the left or the bottom part of the chart occupied where the top isn't, that's going to say something about your personality. And you can check out the book if you want to understand that more. So that is something specific where it's like a lot of energy might be generated into relationships if you have this really right side dominant chart, for example. So your life could be very focused on that. If you have an empty house or empty parts of the chart, it doesn't make that not significant anymore. It just means that this area might be a little bit either less of a focus or less complicated for you, but there's a lot more nuance there than that. If you have an empty house, you really want to look at the sign that's in that house and go to the planet in charge of that sign to understand that house.
Okay.
So, for example,
I'm
if you
looking
have
at my chart.
Okay, yeah. So if you have any questions there, if you have like any
Yeah, like Pisces and Virgo I have nothing in.
Okay, what house numbers are those?
12 and 6. 12 is Pisces.
Okay. So that's good to have nothing in 12th house, given what we've said about those planets being
you're right.
most repressed. 6th house is also not the best house. There are like bad houses they have negative meanings associated with them, and they can be more troublesome to have planets in. So the 6th, 8th, and 12th are those houses. So if you don't have planets there, it's a pretty good thing to have no planets there.
Great.
If, like, let's say you have Pisces in the 12th, so you would look at Jupiter. Modern astrologers would look at Neptune. I personally just look at Jupiter as the ruler of Pisces, and I would look at where that is in your chart to describe more of your 12th house. The 12th house is like our relationship with spirit. It's also about our dreams, our sleep quality. And so you would kind of look to that, and even to understand your time alone, things like that.
Okay. I mean, I'm not saying like I am like totally healed or whatever, but I just think that I feel, I mean, not in my earlier life, but definitely in like the second part of my life or where I'm currently at, this push to look at everything about me, this push to like heal things, or like, okay, what is this next thing, or like, what am I not seeing, or like that healing growth. So it's like vulnerable to have like to look under the rug and see that.
Yeah.
But I don't feel like I'm like on that path. Like it's kind of exciting for me, or it's like, this is what I'm supposed to be doing right now.
Yeah. Do you have planets in Scorpio or in the 8th house?
Let's see. I
wish I pulled up your chart before we started.
Yes, but I don't know what those mean.
Do you know what they are?
I think there's a node. There's a node in Scorpio. The Saturn in the 8th house in Scorpio.
Okay.
Pluto in the 8th house in Scorpio. They're all in the 8th house. That's what's happening. And South Node in Scorpio.
In South Node. Okay. Yeah. So it makes sense that like your second half of your life that you would be really doing a lot of self-exploration with Saturn there, because obviously our Saturn return, which happens around age 30, is when we really start to work on our Saturn. Saturn is a karmic planet. We all have stuff we're trying to work on that we really need to figure out. And the 8th house is deeply psychological, and it's a lot about processing our past and the things that have sometimes been traumatic for us, or at the very least have maybe undermined our confidence or made us feel some type of way. So having a Saturn return with Saturn in the 8th house is going to bring up those emotions. So I'd be curious, like, what was going on around age 29, 30? Like, were you feeling some of these themes? Were you feeling very self-aware? Were you processing a lot? Were you going to therapy? Because a lot of those things can like be progressed further after that Saturn return.
Yeah. I actually became a therapist. I graduated my master's, and I was like trying to be a therapist. And I remember just feeling so lost in that, like emotionally. I'm like, who am I? Who am I as a therapist? What am I going through? And I'm like codependently looking at other people to tell me who I am, being codependent with clients. Like, it was a very emotional time. I also got married, I think that same year. and then started having children all in my early 30s, which again is another emotional roller coaster. But then children not forced me, but became the reflections for me to then go deeper, because I was getting activated in a lot of ways. Like, what is that?
Yeah.
And it continues to do that for me. My sweet kids.
Yeah. You can see your, like, part of your relationship with your kids and even their personalities by looking at your 5th house and the planet in charge of the sign that's in the 5th house.
Oh.
So, for example, I just had a client yesterday that I did a fertility reading for, and she had a lot of planets in contact with her child planet. And I saw this really complex story of them being the thing that helps heal her and uplift her and help her own her voice. But then they're also triggering and bring up stuff from the past and unresolved issues. And I think that's often the case anyway, but it was really emphasized in her chart. So it's like you can see these common themes that people experience as humans, but then when it's like a really strong theme in your chart, you're going to have that much more pronounced throughout your life than somebody else would.
Yeah, I like that, because it can be like healing and triggering just across the board, and I think for me, it felt a little more exaggerated of my own work in that. Like, I felt called to that, where I think, I look at some friends who are like, oh, I'm fine. Like, it's like, I'm not thrown back into therapy because of it. So I just see that like nuance, or that like almost like dialing up in some way.
Yeah.
This invitation and back to yourself of like, what's here to still heal for you.
Yeah.
At least that was my perspective of it. And so fertility readings, tell us what does that look like? Like, that must be so hard.
What do you mean?
Emotionally, no? I mean, when people come to you, are they, I don't know, that just feels like a lot.
Yeah, I just started offering them, and I'm really excited to grow in this area of my my business. I'm in a lot of courses around like fertility and coaching and herbalism and all these things that can help me better understand like how to help. So I think I'm still in a phase of learning, although I definitely have a lot of information to share. So I'm still, right now, as of this recording, I'm offering fertility readings for free, especially for those who are struggling with infertility or who've been trying for a while to get pregnant, or who have anything that they're concerned about in terms of that. So if that sounds like you, definitely hit me up, contact@cosmicclarity.astrology.com. I don't know how long they'll be free for, because they do take up a lot of time for me to research. But basically, sorry, go ahead.
And you're looking at like health, body, and like past, you're looking at everything, right?
I'm looking at everything. Okay. Exactly. So when I'm looking at fertility, I'm looking at what's in the 5th house. What's the ruler of the 5th house? What's going on with your moon, with your rising sign? And I'm looking at those in terms of how fertile are you? What are blockages to your fertility, both physically and psychologically? What are imbalances that you might be predisposed to? Are there any foods or herbs or just lifestyle practices that you could, involve yourself in to kind of balance out some of these things? And most importantly, what are the best times for pregnancy? Because people are trying to get pregnant and they're in an infertile window and they're feeling rushed and they're like, well, I'm already 32 or I'm 35 and I got to get pregnant now. And I'm like, well, I just had a client, for example, that her partner really wanted her to get pregnant. So I didn't know this going into it, but I looked at her timing and I was like, okay, she should really get pregnant more in 2026 or 2027. I found a couple dates that really made sense. And
are you looking at the transits?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Got it.
And it's helpful because I also like to look at, her and the partner's chart. So I like to look at their compatibility, because sometimes there could be infertility on the partner's side, or maybe they have relationship issues that like clearly need to be resolved before they have a child. So I like to look at that, as well as especially the relationship with their mother.
Mother.
So like
Yeah.
What's the mother wound? Is there
Yes.
something going on here that's a little bit deeper? And I'm curious to explore that even more in the future, with like beliefs around being a parent, because I want to offer like coaching around this, but I'm not doing that yet. But I think that's super curious to explore, like
Yeah.
what we were taught. So I'm kind of looking at a lot of things. And with that client, I told her, I'm like, it really makes sense for you to get pregnant then, because you're having these poor health transits these next couple years that are really about focusing on building yourself up, healing things. You don't want to be pregnant when you're like, that's so taxing on your body. And then to have an ill health transit at the same time is not only can it prevent the fertility from happening or having a miscarriage even, but it's not good for you on top of that. So I told her that, and she was like, she wasn't having her period. She was really stressed, and she told me that her partner was really the one wanting to get pregnant right now. And so he's applying the pressure. And she told me after I gave her that timeline and she talked to her partner and they saw it, like it gave her like a third party or another reason to have time to work on these things that she wanted to work on. She said that gave her so much peace and she started her period again. So,
oh my gosh.
Yeah. So like there's a lot of healing that I think can come from just understanding these cycles that we're in and respecting those cycles and not forcing ourselves or pushing ourselves or abusing ourselves for not being somewhere we're not ready to be or not accomplishing something that's not meant to be accomplished right now. And it's like it gives you this sense of like compassion, I think, for ourselves.
Yeah. Pressure is the word. Pressure.
Stress.
When you can kind of name the pressure that somebody's inducing for them, like in pregnancy, I mean, there's a ticking time bomb, blah, 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 blah. Like there's just a lot of pressure for women in fertility. And then I think even relationships, like I need to be in a relationship by this or like because of the kids, because I need to, So I think what you're doing is kind of alleviating that pressure, kind of naming that pressure and saying, hey, does this need to be here right now? What if we kind of removed that? Would that open up something else because you're trying to make something like work and it's not working,
Yeah.
And that's a hard conversation.
And I think it's such a gift also to have something outside of you that can validate your desire for waiting or your desire for having a kid at a specific time or whatever. It's like we are very intuitive, and many of the women I have as clients are extremely in touch with their bodies and their intuition and their third eye, and they get downloads, but then we can invalidate our experiences or our feelings because of those pressures from outside of society. So when we have a divine external source to be like, this also is agreeing with me, it feels so encouraging, and it feels like I can have conviction now about what I feel and follow that.
I love that. Courtney, I mean, I have so many more questions about Venus, about midheaven, and all the things, but maybe we'll have you on again if
I would love that.
Feels good. Yeah. Because I feel like, I mean, it's just a deep dive. And I'm in it, but I'm also like a consumer and curious. So I have like very specific questions.
I love that though. That's exciting.
Yeah. Courtney, okay, tell again people where to find you. You are on YouTube, you have your own podcast. Give us all the things and we'll also put it in the show notes.
Okay, yeah. My website, if you want to check out my readings, is cosmicclarityastrology.com. That's also my YouTube channel. My podcast, I'm kind of like probably going to be rebranding that soon, but it's called Astrology is Real. I would just subscribe to my email list because I'll send you my YouTube videos. I'll send you astrology forecasts. And if I have any kind of like special offerings, like I let people on there know, because sometimes I'll offer a discount.
Yeah.
Not usually though. So if you want that though, definitely subscribe to my email.
Yeah, it's great. Courtney, thank you so much.
Thank you. I appreciate this. I love talking about astrology, and it's so nice to chat.
You're good at it, girl. So
thank you.
Okay, we'll have you on again.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Bye. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you've made it through this far and was like, I have no idea what they are talking about, Make sure to check out Courtney's YouTube channel, Cosmic Clarity Astrology, as she has so many free resources to help you understand your own birth chart. And of course, if you're interested in a personal reading, you can check out her website. And lastly, if you are loving what you're hearing, please give us a review up on Apple Podcasts so that we can continue to reach and help others. We'll see you next time.